Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. An emergency vet clinic is expected to open this spring in Bloomington, which, like much of the state, has been without around-the-clock pet care.
We've had calls from local politicians and local veterinarians that they're having difficulty getting veterinary coverage in their area of the state.
The lack of emergency care is also affecting the livestock industry. The White House signaled it would end the COVID health emergency in May, but some are worried people have already dismissed the pandemic.
That doesn't mean that it can't evolve to be more severe in the future. So I think it's a big misnomer that people have.
Ending the emergency means Americans will have to start paying for tests and vaccines. And we check in with reporter Brandon Smith for the latest at the Statehouse 1 month into the session. We'll have these stories plus the latest news from across the state right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Hoosiers gathered at the Statehouse this week to protest bills targeting LGBTQ youth. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Lauren Chapman reports none of the nearly 24 bills identified have received hearings yet, but activists are worried.
LGBTQ activists and advocates are concerned about a wide variety of bills this session. But several bills that would ban gender-affirming care for transgender youth rise to the top of many of their concerns. Zoe O'Hallen-Byrne is the director of engagement for Indiana Youth Group. Indiana ranks second worst for youth suicide in the country, and she says these bills could make it worse.
We've got these really bad statistics of what happens when youth are not being supported. So by making healthcare accessible to trans youth and non-binary youth and queer youth in general, where they feel that they can go and get competent, affirming, and compassionate care is a valuable lifeline. It's going to keep a lot of these youth alive.
Katie Blair is the ACLU of Indiana's Director of Advocacy and Public Policy. She says the ACLU has gathered activists and advocates for the last 4 years, but this year is even more important.
Unfortunately, this year we've seen just an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ bills, 3 times the amount we've ever seen.
None of the bills have been called for a hearing, but Blair says the ACLU will be ready when they do.
Right now we're watching these bills like a hawk. As soon as one is scheduled, you can bet that you are going to hear from us. And there was a huge crowd out here today, and that crowd is just going to be bigger and badder when those bills come up for a hearing.
For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Lauren Chapman.
There are nearly 24 bills the ACLU of Indiana has identified as anti-LGBTQ. We're joined now by Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith for more on the happenings at the Statehouse. Brandon, thanks for joining us.
Always happy to be here, Joe.
So Senate lawmakers took their first steps aimed at improving the state's public health system, something Governor Holcomb has pushed for. Can you tell us what they're hoping to accomplish?
Well, the goal is to ensure that every Hoosier has access to the same core services from their local health department. Now, legislation creates a list of about 24 such services that departments must provide if they want significantly increased funding from the state. But some local leaders, like St. Joseph County Councilor Amy Drake, are fearful of a state takeover of public health.
If I tell my constituents I don't want to take a big chunk of money, they're going to say, why don't you care about us? Why don't you care about our public health? And our issue is we don't want to opt into that and then have so many strings that we're not allowed to make the decisions that we want for our people.
Brandon, a separate bill related to mental health unanimously passed out of Senate committee yesterday. What's in it?
Well, the bill is meant to be a boost for community mental health clinics around the state and the 988 mental health crisis hotline. The measure does contain like metrics the state will use to measure the effectiveness of providing access to care. But the Senate committee stripped out the actual funding in the bill, so that'll be a state budget debate.
A Senate bill would force school board candidates to declare a party affiliation. Does it have a chance of getting a vote?
It might. It does have a chance of getting a vote, though it's unclear if it will in the Senate. It didn't get a vote last year in a House committee, but it would this year if it comes up for a hearing. Now, a few people showed up this year to support the measure in the Senate committee. All of them were just unhappy about last year's election results, but they say forcing school board candidates to declare a party promotes transparency. Now, longtime school board member Bob Savage told the committee it does just the opposite.
By boiling down a person's life experiences, their role within their community to a single label of a political party, a wall is built like walls are built by most labels and leads the voter to or away from a candidate for reasons that are not important to the community.
Soaring home values have led to big increases in property taxes. So what are lawmakers looking to do to address that?
Well, importantly, so far, nothing that would affect this year's tax bills. What they're exploring right now would affect future property taxes by temporarily lowering the caps on how much homeowners can pay. But local government leaders say reducing property taxes would be a big blow to counties, cities, towns, and schools.
This would be a great curveball in 24, 25, 26 that would be difficult for a city that's not in a super growth pattern yet to overcome.
Before you go, former Governor Daniels decided not to run for Senate this week. Why did he make that decision? What's the race for Mike Braun's seat shaping up like?
Well, Mitch Daniels said it wasn't the life he wanted to lead at this time, that he never really envisioned himself in a legislative role. In terms of the race overall, it looks like a coronation for Congressman Jim Banks, at least in the GOP primary.
All right, Brandon, we're out of time. Appreciate your coverage. Thank you. Youth climate activists are back at the Statehouse trying again to create a state climate task force. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports they've gathered with lawmakers, environmental groups, solar advocates, and others Wednesday to rally for climate action in Indiana.
Junior high school student Rahul Durai co-leads the state youth climate group Confront the Climate Crisis. He says last year they worked on a bill to create a climate task force, but it didn't even get a hearing.
We're trying for it again because the climate crisis didn't go anywhere. We're still dealing with impacts of climate change across Indiana, and there's such large bipartisan support that this really is in reach for our legislature.
Lawmakers that support the bill say the legislature is not only ignoring the serious risks of climate change, but the state is also missing out on an economic opportunity. Several companies looking to move into the state say they want to be powered by clean energy.
Republicans have blocked sound energy policy for years. They've blocked this critical discussion from even happening. In the meantime, Indiana misses out on an economic opportunity.
Supporters say it's going to take more than a hearing to pass the climate task force bill and encourage advocates to contact their senators. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
Data shows Indiana is already experiencing more extreme heat and heavy rain events today than it did in 1970. Well, we're joined now by Catherine Patterson for headlines from around the area. Welcome to the show, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Joe. Bloomington will receive $1.9 million from the state funds to upgrade a stretch of its sewer system. The city plans on using the money to replace nearly 1,600 feet of pipe along South Patterson Drive. That will improve the flow of water and particularly help pharmaceutical giant Catalent. The money is available through the READY program, a state initiative launched by Governor Holcomb to increase economic opportunity in Indiana.
This is a way to anticipate and keep pace with that growth, keep our infrastructure, where it needs to be to support it, and to do so with state funding is sort of the best scenario for us.
The money was approved by the Indiana Uplands Region Steering Committee, which is tasked with distributing $30 million in READY money in an 11-county area. The White House signaled it will end the COVID-19 public health emergency this spring. That also means an end to some benefits, but it doesn't mean you should stop paying attention to the virus. Pat Bean has this report.
President Biden says the White House emergency declaration will expire after an initial extension into May. The World Health Organization also made a statement this week saying while the global pandemic is not yet over, it is most likely to end this year. But IU's Assistant Director of Public and Environmental Health, Graham McKean, is still concerned. More than 3 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, he says it's hard to know the wreckage left behind. In the last year, there seems to be a lack of surveillance, data, and reporting with clinical cases.
Just because it has trended to evolve to be more intrinsically less severe from an acute phase, that doesn't mean that it can't evolve to be more severe in the future. So I think it's a big misnomer that people have.
Ending the national and public health emergencies also means many Americans will have to pay for COVID-19 testing, treatment, and vaccinations. McKean is concerned about equity when it comes to health care in a post-pandemic world, as there were also social safety net benefits provided to several Americans.
There was some food stamp benefits that were increased during the pandemic that will decrease when the emergency ends, and a lot of people might actually be kicked off Medicaid when this occurs as well. And so we might have millions of Americans losing health care coverage. So I think that's a big concern.
Pfizer and Moderna announced commercial prices for their vaccines could be between $82 and $130 per dose. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Pat Bean.
McKean says the next public health frontier IU is focused on is indoor air filtration. He says the university will begin to direct funding into this area. A special committee will take up the case of Bloomington Traffic Commissioner Greg Alexander, who has been under fire because of recent social media activity. Bloomington City Council debated on whether to remove Alexander Wednesday night before referring the matter to the committee.
I've been told I did that, and just being told, that's enough for me to know that I did something wrong. I clearly failed.
Several residents complained to the council about Alexander's tweets late last year, a number of which contained profanity. The tweets came after the city agreed to install a stop sign in the Elm Heights neighborhood that, as Commissioner Alexander opposed.
Residents expect you to lead by example. We expect better. We deserve better.
Under Bloomington's local code, City Council can remove a council appointee to a city board or commission for cause. Indiana has a school student to counselor ratio of 694 to 1, well above the national average, according to the American School Counselor Association. It's an increase from last year's ratio of 475 to 1, and it could get worse for the state as counselor positions funded by the Lilly Endowment and COVID relief are ending.
The overall job climate in education in Indiana and the educator pay. And so we're having to compete with neighboring states who have a little better situation.
Kendall Weiss is a school counselor and a member of the state association. She says a ratio as large as Indiana's has a negative effect on students.
So students who are in crisis are not going to learn well. So if you're not learning well, you're going to fall further behind in your academic performance. Your test scores are going to take a hit, which we've seen that as well.
The average ratio nationally for 2022 was 408 to 1, down slightly from the year before. The National Association recommends a ratio of 250 to 1. And it is tax season, and Hoosiers can expect smaller refunds this year compared to previous years. IU accounting professor Greg Geisler says these changes are due to the expiration of COVID benefits, such as reduced child and dependent care credit. The 2021 stimulus checks are another reason refunds will be smaller this year. They added $1,400 to some refunds last year.
If someone's impacted by any of these changes that I mentioned, they might be surprised, smaller refund than they got last year, or they might be surprised, more than they owed last year. So it is a big deal.
And Joe, Geisler says the IRS has a large backlog, so the best way to get your refund quickly is to file early and electronically.
Catherine, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. An emergency veterinary clinic is expected to open this spring in Bloomington, but for now, there's no place near for after-hours care. And we look into the latest on the case of Tanisha Chappelle, a Louisville woman who died in custody of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
We care about things that affect the lives of every American.
We are there at the front lines
to get to the heart of what really matters in every issue.
This country has not seen this in 80 years.
This extraordinary moment in American history.
You're making such a huge impact.
Trust is at the heart of what we do.
Life is full of choices, and right now your favorite member benefit, Passport, is offering more choices for you to stream.
Welcome to the club.
It's a beautiful thing. With cooking.
I gotta let it cook, but I keep wanting to smell it.
Travel.
And here we are.
Documentaries.
I realized I could change the world.
And so much more. The choice is yours with Passport on the PBS Video app.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Well, it's been over a year and a half since Tanisha Chappelle died from severe medical complications while incarcerated in the Jackson County Jail. Dom Hayab reports on the latest, including a recently released deposition by the Jackson County Sheriff.
1, 2, 3. We love you, Tanisha Chappelle!
1.5 years after Chappelle died in the Jackson County Jail, the public is still asking why. For her lawyer, Sam Aguiar, the reasons are becoming clear. Last March, Aguiar deposed County Sheriff Rick Meyer, and on January 12th of this year, that transcript was filed. Sheriff Meyer says in the deposition that proper medical procedures were not followed when managing Chappelle's illness. Aguiar says that she vomited blood. In the transcript, Meyer says that if that's the case, she should have been sent to the hospital or at least been evaluated by a physician. Chappelle's lawyer agrees.
The video speaks for itself. The evidence speaks for itself. It's pretty obvious that you had a woman that was suffering, getting worse, showing serious medical issues, and that they just let her die.
Aguiar argues that other systemic issues made Chappelle's situation even worse. In the deposition, Aguiar says the jail nurse had a 3 to 4 month backlog of inmate medical screenings. The screenings let officers know about an inmate's medical conditions. Because of the backlog, Chappelle never received a screening. The parties have yet to agree on a settlement in the case.
Dom joins us now for a little bit more. You point out some of the systemic issues that worsened Tanisha's experience in the jail. Were there any other things that stood out to you in that deposition?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few of the things that stood out to me in the deposition were specifically whether or not jail protocols were followed in terms of medical conditions and things that are going on in that regard, as well as whether or not officers were following their first aid training. So you're looking at this, it's not just whether or not the jail was overstaffed or understaffed, which is a lot of the focus on cases like this, but in this particular case, we're looking at whether or not the jail officials actually did things like call for an ambulance when Tanisha was experiencing these things, whether or not they called a physician in this instance as well. It's pretty rough.
Have you spoken with Tanisha's family at all?
Yes, I have. It's been obviously an incredibly year and a half for them, an incredibly difficult year and a half. But they stay positive in the fact that they might be seeking some justice here soon for her. And it's pretty unimaginable to either lose, a mother, a sister, a daughter. But they're looking to find that justice.
Was this an isolated incident, or had there been other deaths at the Jackson County Jail?
Yeah, so actually not too long after Tanisha's death, someone else died under somewhat similar circumstances in the jail, and we're actually going to be looking at that moving forward. Both cases are actually pursuing litigation. So.
All right, Tom, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
2 months ago, it was announced that Bloomington would be getting a new emergency vet clinic to help fill an existing hole in coverage. Clayton Baumgarth talked to experts to find out why emergency vet care has been lacking in Bloomington.
At the Bloomington Animal Shelter, staff members see their fair share of tough sights from the animals they've rescued.
I can't think of the exact dog's name, but we had a dog that was appeared to be hit by a car.
In Bloomington, emergency vet care is lacking, and getting timely critical care for animals in need is challenging.
Instead of being able to get to a vet to get x-rays right away, what we did is we had to bring it back to the shelter. We started on pain management. And then the next day, as soon as we could, we had staff come in and just start calling around to see which vets we could get in.
Because his staff is trained to keep injured animals in stable condition, the dog came out of the accident just fine.
Ended up being okay, and we got it recovered from that, no broken bones or anything, but it would have been nice having a bit extra triage the day of the injury.
Bloomington has a decent number of vet clinics in the area that provide wellness checkups, surgeries, and prescriptions for pets. If your pet can manage to wait a day or so to get into an appointment, you're covered. But all the clinics in town are closed on Sunday, with some being closed and others having limited hours on Saturday. If your cat decides to snack on your potted lilies on Saturday afternoon, you're out of luck to get treatment in town until Monday morning. That is, unless you decide to rush to one of the nearest 24/7 vet clinics in either Beech Grove or Fishers, a drive that can take nearly an hour and a half depending on traffic. When time is of the essence, it's the last thing that any pet owner wants to do. Souter says the lack of 24/7 vet care is a complicated issue for multiple reasons.
Part of it is the availability of staffing, of course. The other piece is, in order to make it go financially, most places need a specific kind of census level in the community, and we're kind of right on that edge.
According to experts at the State Board of Animal Health, Bloomington is feeling the effects of a nationwide issue.
We've experienced a shortage in areas across our state. We've had calls from local politicians and local veterinarians that they're having difficulty getting veterinary coverage in their area of the state. It's not unique to Indiana. It's across the United States.
Dr. Marsh says that since the start of COVID, the number of people seeking and getting pets increased, leading to more people seeking health care for those pets.
There's been increased demand for veterinary services, and so the hours to be available and the demands to be available have certainly increased over the last couple of years.
The issue goes even further, where ranchers are even having difficulty sourcing vet care for livestock like cows, pigs, horses, and chickens. Dr. Marsh recommends one strategy to help your animals get the care they need through this shortage of staff.
I think one of the critical things is that pet owners or livestock owners, you own a horse, whatever it might be, that you've established a relationship prior. Because veterinarians are very busy, and so if you don't have a relationship and you cold call the clinic, they have a list of clients that have established that relationship, and they're going to be looking to them.
Shelter Director Souter echoes those thoughts.
From an individual that works with animals, an individual that has animals, vet care is not easy. It's a very stressful profession, so the more people have compassion and good relationships with their vets, the more people are going to be interested in pursuing and taking that route.
For Bloomingtonians, Vet Check Urgent Care Center is opening sometime in the spring. Souter welcomes the new business.
We love working with our vets in the community. We don't have a veterinarian on staff, so we rely on those relationships with the different clinics. So if we have another clinic coming to town that's willing to kind of work with us and help with our needs, emergencies, that's a great thing.
There you go, good puppy.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Clayton Baumgarth.
VetCheck's addition should close Monroe County's gap in 24/7 emergency vet care. Well, a state Senate bill aims to change which maps local floodplain administrators have to rely on when granting construction permits. It has passed out of committee, now heads to the full Senate for consideration. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports flood experts and environmental groups worry more Hoosiers could be at risk for floods if the bill becomes law.
Some counties have granted permits using federal flood maps instead of the state's, leading to disputes with homeowners that didn't know they were in a flood zone. Proponents of the bill say Indiana's maps are too restrictive, but others would call them more protective. FEMA itself has said its flood maps are outdated. Some areas of the state haven't been mapped by FEMA at all, says Jared Hahn. He's president of the Indiana County Surveyors Association and on the state's Drainage Task Force. Hahn remembers the most common things he would hear from flood victims as a first responder.
I didn't know I was in a flood zone. Another one is, I'm not in a mapped flood zone. How am I flooding? Another one is, I didn't know my homeowner's insurance didn't cover this. And the last one is, we lost everything.
Instead of passing the bill, groups opposed to it suggest better educating local floodplain administrators and informing the public when new state flood maps come out. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
Because of local ordinances, some floodplain administrators would still be required to check the state's maps before issuing permits, even if the bill becomes law. With 6 games remaining in the Big Ten women's basketball team, the Indiana women sit atop the conference at 11-1. But if the 4th-ranked Hoosiers want to win their first regular season title since 1983, they'll have to run through a gauntlet of games against ranked teams. Now that includes 2 games against 6th-ranked Iowa and 1 at number 10 Ohio State.
I'm going to guess that if you want to compare the top, whatever they are in the league, that going down the stretch here, the Hoosiers probably have the most difficult road.
The Hoosiers are led by senior center Mackenzie Holmes, who's averaging 22 points and 8 rebounds a game. IU has 5 other players averaging 9 points a game or better, which makes it hard for teams to just focus on Holmes. Indiana, which is 21-1 overall, plays next Sunday afternoon at rival Purdue. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.